Does it come in black?
Mercedes just unveiled the new W14 F1 car for this season in a digital launch, although they were at pains to say they were about to hit the track, so I wonder if they saw Ferrari yesterday and got some ideas about how well that went down. Mercedes revealed the updated W14 car with its drivers on stage, Lewis Hamilton, George Russell and new reserve driver Mick Schumacher, alongside team principal Toto Wolff. Let's take our first look. My name is Martyn Lee. I'm joined by our Grand Prix editor Alex Kalinauckas to discuss. So, disappointed they weren't using AC/DC as their theme tune. Back in black for Merc this year. Alex, why has it gone back to a livery last seen when certainly the car was quicker on track?
Oh, I mean, 2021 and 2020 compared to 2022 when the silver came back, yes, much more successful in terms of wins and titles for Mercedes. But this time around, 2023, W14, slightly different reason why they've got a black livery, and that's primarily to do with weight saving. The team was very open about this. It spoke last year about how it never really got down to the weight target, or at least it wasn't sufficiently under it so that it could move the ballast around nicely, because it was basically just throwing bits on the car to try and claw back downforce, to try and claw things back in a different way, and that actually was adding weight because it wasn't obviously handling optimally. Mercedes will hope that has been fixed. I'm sure we'll come on to talk about that later on, the potential of the car, how things might go with the various new bits and new shapes. But yeah, Toto Wolff pretty much up front, out saying it, you know, we are all about saving weight, so it's completely naked carbon. That seems to be the phrase of the moment. We're looking at the other teams. I think we're going to have quite a dark sort of, the cars are just going to look sort of homogenous and all sort of pretty dark color schemes going on there. But interesting also, Toto, he mentioned the classic reason why this is harking back to the history of Mercedes and the silver arrows, taking the white off, the bare aluminium underneath. I'm pretty sure that's actually an urban myth. I can't confirm that here and now. Everyone go away, do your own research, but I don't think that's necessarily 100% true, but it is obviously famous part of the Mercedes story nevertheless. So yeah, black is back. It's completely bare carbon. Mercedes is going to have to hope it goes as well in 2023 as it did in 2020 and 2021.
Well, okay, leave us a comment below if you know the true story behind that. Now, at the end, it was a very professional, polished, digital launch. So different to, I'm still talking about Ferrari's launch yesterday. I'm kind of obsessed about it, which was different to oily bits and engineering and the drivers in their race suits. It was, at the end, Toto even addressed the camera directly, like we are, and said, we're delighted that we show you the real car today, and now we're going to take it to the track in an hour's time. But the big question for you, our Grand Prix editor, was this a real car?
So obviously with the sort of renders that will be shown around, there's going to be an element of, you know, these necessarily the final bits that we're going to see on. But I think what Mercedes showed us is it was a real car. There's no, that, you know, if they're going to be shaking it down in an hour's time, that would definitely be what they're doing. You think both with Mercedes today and Ferrari yesterday, I think there was an element of, come on, Red Bull, stop lying to everyone and claiming that that's a 2023 car or 2022 car as it was last year, and they did the same bizarre reasoning, not being honest with their fans. But yeah, I mean, there's what's another cliche? There's no two ways to skin a cat. I mean, first of all, why would you want to do that to a cat? But anyway, you can do things in different ways. Ferrari chose to have a proper event, a proper get everybody involved. I just thought what they did was really slick yesterday in terms of, right, and you've seen the car, now we're actually going to run it. I thought that was like a nice part of the production. But with Mercedes, you know, it's a little bit more behind the scenes. It's a little more tightly controlled. There were suggestions that things like the livery and stuff had leaked out ahead of time. Whether that's all part of the game, who knows? You know, obviously not ideally is what you want to happen, but you know, it's just different ways of doing it slightly differently. But the honesty factor, I think you would appreciate as a fan, as a viewer, us as the media, certainly there when it comes to getting a look at the first look of the new car.
Also on stage, Mike Elliott and Hal Thomas talking about the chassis and the power unit as well. Kind of, you know, politicians' answers, but Mike Elliott did say we went back and looked at everything, even though it's an evolution of the car we saw last year. But can you tell us what's different in terms of the car concept?
Yeah, so it's interesting that they had Mike Elliott there, obviously technical director of the Mercedes team, because I spoke to him at the end of last year, and it was really, really interesting chatting to him about what had gone wrong with the W13, what they were hoping to fix in the W14, but he couldn't quite say either thing, because that's the Formula One thing, right? They never want to give away the answers. He was like, I can't tell you exactly where it went wrong because that will reveal what we're trying to fix for the W14. But essentially, we're led to understand Mercedes feels what you saw last year with the W13's concept was right. They just went slightly wrong It turns out it was one bit of simulation data, one result that sent them down the wrong path. They didn't spot that early enough. A series of subsequent mistakes were made. And that's when obviously every team had porpoising problems, but theirs were so fantastically massive. So Mercedes basically feels if we can get back to the point where we went wrong, we think there's lots and lots of potential in the car. They talk about I think that the figure that was bandied about was 3 or 4 tenths that they could just unlock at a stroke if they're successful in doing the work they needed to unpick what had gone wrong, what Mike Elliott said was baked into the W13. And essentially, we're talking really about the big flaw. It was flexing under peak load. It was triggering massive porpoising. Mercedes did get on top of that last year. So basically, it is an evolution car because Mercedes couldn't go. There's almost no point going back and starting again. I'm sure we'll come and talk later on about why Mercedes hasn't just turned up with a Red Bull copy or something like that. So basically, we've got the zero pods. They're still there, but they're ever so slightly different. The side pods are sort of tighter and sleeker in different places. So essentially, this time around, it's the middle of the side pods that's slightly wider. And that means that they're also sort of less tight to the rear. So the floor looks slightly smaller. So Mercedes obviously working with the raised height on the floor as a change to the diffuser. Looks like they are working on what really did go wrong there with the car. And yet at the same time are confident that what they saw in the initial promise of the package of the W13 is there too. We've got, and Mike Elliott said, brand new front and rear suspension, too. So, obviously they looked at the aeroflows and structures going around that. And, the new nose as well. It looks much longer and sleeker compared to last year.
Oh, let's dig into porpoising a little bit more. I remember last year at testing, and you were trackside, and you and I spoke afterwards, and clearly everyone was discovering what was to be a big feature of last season. But Mercedes, even at that time, particularly the second test, you were surprised about how extreme it was in places. And Ferrari had it as well, but seemed to get it under control. But you've mentioned Mercedes struggled with porpoising, bouncing, if you want to call it that. Some people call them two different things, two different phenomena. But let's dig into that, a little bit more. Surely to get rid of it is just to copy the way that either Red Bull solved it or a different car philosophy, because they can't afford. I mean, we even had it in Shakedown last year, even though they weren't going at huge speeds. It started to rear its head. So, what can they do to kind of guarantee that when the car hits the track this afternoon, that phenomena is gone?
So I'm actually going to answer this slightly randomly with something from a driver from a different team. What he was saying, Carlos Sainz at the Ferrari launch yesterday, was essentially saying until we drive the car, until we test it properly, we don't really know if porpoising is 100% gone. But obviously the changes that the FIA have implemented, raising the floor, not as much as the FIA wanted. The teams objected to it, coming up by 15 millimeters, only 10 now, change to the diffuser as well. And keeping that oscillation metric, the checking things aren't bouncing too much. It's all going to be part of it. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether it does fix it 100%. I think, the suggestion is that Mercedes last year felt it had eliminated porpoising, but maybe not to get the drivers totally comfortable. Like Lewis Hamilton was talking about feeling it still bouncing and still moving around that little bit more than George Russell at the end of last year. Interesting, by the way, I think it'd be a nice birthday present today for George Russell if he does, when he shakes down the car at Silverstone and it's not porpoising and bouncing around horrifically. That will probably please him very well. Also, no Storm Eunice like there was when Mercedes launched its car last year. So there certainly should be calmer conditions. But yeah, essentially, by making making changes that at least appear to make the floor slightly smaller, I think Mercedes at the very least is feeling confident, should be feeling happier that it's not going to have the same horrific sort of extent to the problem of last year. But as Sainz has said for Ferrari as well, which that car was still bouncing all the way through the season, you're not going to know until testing starts whether it's totally gone.
I wonder if they watched the Ferrari launch yesterday and went, hey, that's our front wing from Austin that we weren't allowed to run. But the gap isn't to close to Ferrari. The gap is to close to Red Bull. And my final question to you is, can they close that gap to Red Bull and even pull ahead, deliver Lewis that number 8 world title that is eluding him at the moment? What do you think?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if that front wing concept does appear on Mercedes very early on in the season, because never actually outlawed. It just understood that had it been run, challenges might have arisen rather, and Mercedes opted not to do it. But it's legal in the rules now, so maybe they'll head back that way. But yeah, in terms of closing the gap to Red Bull, this is again why it wouldn't necessarily have been, unless you had a cast iron guarantee that it would work. It's why it's not sensible to just go, right, we're going to copy the RB18, because you're a year behind in terms of development. You're a year behind in understanding that concept. And as I said earlier, Mercedes is confident in its base package. Like, it is confident that what it tried to do last year should have worked, but things went wrong. And if it doesn't go down that incorrect alley, if it doesn't have that wrong result in its simulation, it should at a stroke, if it's been successful, have unlocked 3 or 4 tenths that it said was baked into the old car concept. That's a massive gain to Red Bull. Now, the problem is, has Red Bull also made a similar gain with its own work? Because we know that its testing, its ATRs, its testing aero testing restrictions are reduced. They're reduced anyway because of the sliding scale for Red Bull. But that's, in terms of the punishment for the cost cap breach, that's going to come in more for the 2024 car. The 2023 car should, in theory, build upon Red Bull's advantage for last year. And that's the problem with Formula One. Things never stay the same. So even though if Mercedes has made a massive gain, if Red Bull was even made half of that gain, in theory, Red Bull should still be ahead. But, I think the problem is we're sort of hearing, or I've certainly heard mixed messages about how successful Mercedes is going to be this year. One source is very, very confident that they've gained massively. Another still hearing similar problems. So you'd like to think it's somewhere down the middle. If you're hearing both sides, probably the truth is buried somewhere in the middle there. But if Mercedes has unlocked what it feels it can, or feels it couldn't last year, but could with a car reset, then it hopefully will be closer. And the reason why I say hopefully is because everyone wants to see a multi-team fight, right? It got pretty boring watching Max Verstappen dominating all those races, as good as he was. And it's not his fault. He can only, race against the opposition that he's got. But an on form, an up for it Mercedes with Lewis Hamilton and the charging George Russell as well, up against Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, hopefully Ferrari too. Ferrari looked very, very confident yesterday at their launch. I mean, that would be great. And that's what Formula One wants. It wants the 2010 that followed 2009. That's really what it wants for this season. And, from a media point of view, from a fan point of view, I really hope that's what we get.
Well, if you're watching this and you haven't seen yesterday's launch, you're wondering what I'm talking about with Ferrari's front wing, you can read a brilliant Plus article by our technical editor Jake Boxall-Legg in the subscriber area of Autosport.com, where we have our long reads and excellent technical analysis for our subscribers, where he talks all about that and the reasons why they unveiled it yesterday. But today was all about Mercedes. So what do you think? Let us know in the comments below what you think of that back in black livery, the chances they've got. If you want to see all three teams fighting back at the front this year, let us know what you think down below. Make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss any of our launch season videos. That, of course, rolls straight into our pre-season testing here at Autosport. And if you like the video, give us a thumbs up so we'll make more just like it. And we'll see you on the next one.